Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today, our Teacher Effectiveness webinar will address effective teaching in early childhood education. We'll be here together for the next 2 hours or so, and so I'd like at this time to find out a little bit about who's in the audience before I introduce our presenter, Beth Rous. You're going to see a pop-up box with a question and some answer responses, and we'd like you to select the role that best fits the one in which you serve. Looks like we have a pretty diverse audience today. I'm interested in finding out who some of our other folks are, because we have a bit of researchers, higher ed, and quite a few others. Glad to see we have preschool teachers and some K-12 folks with us. The hope is that all members of the audience will get something out of today's session and learn a little bit about the importance of early childhood education and the implications for those of you who are in K-12. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our presenter for today. Beth Rous is a professor in the Department of Educational Leadership Studies, the College of Education, and the director of the Kentucky Partnership for Early Childhood Services at the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. Beth has taught preschool, elementary, and middle school levels, and for almost 20 years she's provided training and technical assistance through a number of federally funded demonstration, outreach, and research projects. She served as the principal investigator for the National Early Childhood Transition Center and the co-principal investigator for CONNECT, the Center to Mobilize Early Childhood Knowledge, which you'll hear a bit about today. At this time, I would love to turn it over to Beth.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm excited to be here and excited to see the group of folks that are joining us today. So let me tell you a little bit about what we hope to accomplish today, and then throughout the webinar, as you know, you'll have some opportunities for discussion and for some activities per se. So as we get started, we're going to talk about teacher effectiveness today, but from the lens of the concept of transition, or how children move between and among programs and into formal schooling. So the teacher effectiveness in early childhood is a really broad field. It takes us a long time to go through everything around how to be an effective teacher across early childhood environments. And so we'll focus specifically around these two concepts. So specifically, we're going to talk about evidence-based practice in terms of the transition to school. We're going to talk about the difference between practices and strategies. We're going to talk about what the research tells us. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time on how do we provide effective professional development in the field of early childhood education. So when I talk about early childhood, we're going to talk about early childhood, sorry about that, folks. We're going to talk about the field of early childhood mainly from the perspective of programs birth through school entry at age 5. What we know is that the National Association for Early Childhood, NAEYC, defines early childhood as birth through 3rd grade. My expertise doesn't really fall in the kindergarten to 3rd grade as much anymore, and the transition practices we're going to talk about have really been focused on that transition of kids as they cross the early childhood areas from the time they're born through early toddlerhood, preschool, and then into formal schooling. The other thing that we'll take into consideration is the multiple environments in which young children spend time. So when we think of early childhood education these days, we think of the places that children spend time before they go to school, which includes child care environments. It includes Head Start environments, early Head Start, public preschool, and private preschools. It also includes programs that are targeted towards at-risk populations. That could be children who are economically at risk or developmentally at risk, as well as some states provide services for children in pre-K that are typically developing. Child care, as we know, is a more universal program for kids to give families a place to put their children while they work. So we'll talk about all of those environments kind of writ large, again, as it pertains to transition. So I want to start with this, what's been happening in our country in the last 2 or 3 years. And many of you may know that there have been some initiatives at the national level to really raise the early childhood field in terms of improving quality of early childhood environments. This is a quote from Barack Obama in his State of Union address in 2013. As a result of the president's interest in early childhood, he has been supporting what we call the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grants across the country. And these are massive grants to states to help them improve quality in early care and education settings and support the integration of our quality environments across child care, pre-K, and Head Start. The investments have been huge, and so to date, the awards have been in the millions of dollars to states. There were 3 phases of investments. The first phase was 9 states, and the total amount of funding in those 9 states was around or close to $500 million. There was around 2 of state competitions, an additional 5 states, and an additional $130 million. And then last round of states in phase 3 included 5 states, and again about $360 million. So the investments have been huge, and a lot of the work in these states is geared towards helping kids be ready for school and making sure they enter school successfully. So what do we know about early childhood education, and why is it important? We have had lots of research over the years in terms of children with special needs and children in child care settings and children in Head Start programs, and what are the benefits of those programs. One of the things that we're highlighting in this slide is a study that came out of Harvard, and this was a study around what was called Project STAR, or Student-Teacher Achievement Ratio. This study highlights some of the importance of early childhood, where they followed around 12,000 students across 79 schools to look at what were the impacts of having high-quality classrooms in K-3 with later success. The impact being these children who were in these settings having higher achievement test scores, they're more likely to attend college, they were more likely to be employed and be homeowners, and they had higher incomes. So what we know from this is class size, teacher quality, peer quality, all had these causal effects on test scores and later outcomes for children across time. We also know that children who participate in what we would call effective early childhood education programs also have good results. So this study represents a 15-year follow-up study of specifically low-income children who participated in public school programs. The study looked at the degree to which they completed high school, the degree to which we had lower dropout rates, and so were we able to retain kids in school if they had high-quality early childhood programs. And definitely, they found higher rates of completion, higher grade retention, and lower amounts of violent arrests and time spent in jail with kids. These effects were greater for boys than girls, which may not be surprising. But in conclusion of their study, they found that participation in the early childhood intervention for low-income children was associated with better educational and social outcomes up to 20 years of age. and that established programs administered through the public school system could promote children's long-term success. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth.
Absolutely. So we're interested at this point to find out from participants in the audience about what effect do you see early childhood education having in your states. So you've heard a little bit of the background and the national picture of where we are. Now we're curious for the states that you're currently working in, what you're seeing. So you'll see a poll pop up on your screen, and we'd like you to type in some thoughts about that question. So Beth, it looks like some of the comments coming in relate to universal pre-K. We have some folks who have a sense that the participation in pre-K is certainly preparing students for kindergarten, serving students who are at risk. Some of the same things you were just mentioning.
This is great, and then I think that the universal preschool, many of you might know that there is a new application out for states around expansion of pre-K services. So it'll be interesting to see in your states if folks are writing for that preschool expansion dollars and the degree to which we're able to expand to more universal pre-K across the country.
It's also nice to see a few mentions of family involvement, and you're going to be talking a bit about the transition from home to school, and we know parents are a critical component.
Absolutely. And responding to Gail, who's talking about the interagency collaboration around quality early learning environments, most definitely. Those in Race to the Top states, one of the things they have to do is look at a quality rating and improvement system, otherwise known as QRIS, for public pre-K. Those programs have been around in some states for a while in terms of child care, but Race to the Top is really around supporting pre-K and getting involved in a tiered quality rating and improvement system, which will be a big change for some of our public pre-K systems.
Great. So it's good to know really where folks stand and what experiences you're all having. We're going to give you many more opportunities to share your experiences and to touch on some of the different aspects of our topic for today. So we'll move right along at this point and let Beth get into the next element on transitions.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. So really what we're going to do now is focus on this concept of transition. And several of you I saw in your comments mentioned this concept of seamless transitions across early childhood and into K and through K through 4. So let's stop and think for just a second about the life of a young child. So many of you may be parents or grandparents, and if you think about your kid's first day in school, let's say 25 years ago, when kids started school, they went to first grade. And then we started kindergarten. And so the first day of school for many kids was kindergarten. Then we started in the late 80s and early 90s beginning to have programs for children with special needs. And those programs started at birth. So all of a sudden we were providing some services for kids at birth. We had an uptick in the 50s and then again in the 70s and 80s in families with dual working parents. So we had an uptick in child care, folks needing a place to put their kids when they were working. Head Start has been around now for a number of years for low-income children. And so we had this opportunity for children to get a head start so that they did better in school if they were at risk. So we have these children and we have these families now in today's world where it may be that mom works, dad works, child gets up in the morning. They may go to a child care program so that mom can get to work by 7 or 8. They may qualify for a Head Start program that could be a half-day program, and so they might leave childcare and go to a Head Start program. They might ride a bus. They might be in the same building. They then, at the end of the day, Head Start's done at 3:30 or 4, and the child then might go back to childcare because mom doesn't get off or dad doesn't get off till 5 or 6 in the evening, or they might go to grandma's house or to Auntie Sue's house. So what we find is our children these days are actually making a lot of transitions throughout the day sometimes, but we have all these programs that start at certain ages, and so children might transition from an early intervention or early Head Start program into a Head Start program at age 3. They might stay in that program for a couple years, and then they might transition to kindergarten in a public school before going on to first grade. So what does this do for our kids? And what does this mean when we have all this movement of kids? And what does this do to families who are in the process of getting used to new programs or may have multiple programs in which they're interacting within a day? So because of this being kind of a potentially stressful time in the lives of families with kids, we've been working for a number of years to figure out what does make this transition process work well and what are some of the strategies that we can use to support these kids in moving back and forth across these programs, across time and across a day. So what's transition? So transition in terms of literal is this changing settings that kids do, both within a day, across time. And when we think of transition, we typically think of those agencies who send children to someplace else and those agencies who receive those children from someplace into their programs that first day in a new program. And what we should really be thinking about in terms of transition is this concept of how do we bridge discontinuity between experiences that the child and the family have across these multiple programs in a day, in a year, week. So interesting things to know about some of the long-term research. We don't use the word transition. We actually use the word continuity. And I'm going to tell you about a study, and I wish I could come up with a name, but it just me and I can't, but I'll look it up for you all at some point. There is a researcher at the University of Florida that started years and years ago doing research around what happens with drug-addicted children and what are the long-term impacts for these children in terms of life success. And within that study found that children, even children who were drug exposed prenatally, did better, and their outcomes were better long-term, the fewer discontinuities they had in the early years. And so for these kids, if they stayed with the same, with their parents or stayed with the same caregivers, they did much better than kids who were moving between and among lots of different caregivers. We would say the same thing happens in terms of kids moving between and among programs, that the more we can bridge and have continuity, then the better our kids are going to do rather than being uprooted and moved across different programs, different settings, different philosophies, different teaching styles, different curricular approaches. So this transition concept is you're moving, You've got sending agencies, you've got receiving agencies, you have families, and what are the ways in which we can support continuity versus discontinuity across these settings. So where do we get the research in early childhood? And we actually get research from two very different fields of knowledge. On the left side of this figure is the early intervention, early childhood special education research. And for years, folks who study the needs of kids with disabilities have focused on transition because our systems for young children with disabilities have built-in discontinuity. So we have early intervention programs that serve children from birth to age 3. And at that point, children must leave early intervention and go into early childhood special education services, typically in a public preschool or under the guise of public schools, although they may be in community-based settings. So we built in discontinuity by the nature of how the funding flows and how the programs are regulated. That research has really been descriptive in nature and looking at very small samples and focused on two big things: family experiences in the transition process, and what are the skills that young kids with disabilities need to function effectively in kindergarten or first grade settings. So very skill-focused and very individual child-focused. On the early childhood side of the house, there has been a lot of research around transition as well, primarily at the beginning through the Head Start program. So Head Start has standards that focus on transition. But that research really has focused on this importance of the formal school entry process, so kindergarten and first grade, and to what degree is their academic achievement maintained throughout the transition process and later on. So when kids have good transition experiences, what does that mean for later academic achievement? Within this, very much focused on ecological factors that play into that transition. So communities, families, everything in the environment in terms of what are the impacts on that transition process. So until very recently, these two fields kind of operated separately. Now there are some efforts to say, how do we bring the research across these two fields together to look at what do we really know about transition across early childhood and the special populations research. What we have found as we look across both early intervention, early childhood special education, and early childhood is that language matters. And so what I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about the language that's involved in the transition research and talk through how we might define that to better support us understanding high or effective practices to support kids' transition. So some components of transition I've already started talking about that I want to define now include these concepts of continuity and this concept of alignment. And until we really understand the differences between continuity and alignment and transition, then it's really hard for us to have practical strategies that support kids and families through these changes. So continuity, what does that mean? So Sue Bredekamp defined continuity as the coherence and connectedness among a child's experiences at home and school from preschool through the early grades. I end on her definition to say it really is coherence and connectedness across home and school from birth through the early grades. So as kids are in child care, as kids are in Head Start, as kids are in pre-K, as kids move between and among, what are the ways in which we can have some level of coherence? If you want to think about coherence, we want to think about how do we minimize the number of settings and changes a child goes through. We also want to think about the degree to which there's some level of continuity in curriculum, in approaches to teaching, in the expectations that we have, in the instructional strategies that we use with these children across these different environments. So if we can't minimize them, how do we connect them in a way that the child's not having to relearn constantly from one adult to another adult, from one setting to another setting? So what are the elements of continuity that we want to think about? And one of them is, how do we help families serve as partners in the homeschool and the community environment? So families are they're the constant in many children's lives. And so if they're our partner, they help us understand what's happening across environments and how we can be more, how we can have more continuity across those environments. Looking at how schools and communities participate and support decision-making processes as far as where kids spend time, how kids spend time, and then the basic of open communication. If children are in a variety of settings, how do we have communication across the folks that are in those settings and working with kids in those settings so that we have more continuity? So what is alignment? Alignment is, if you think of alignment, we have our tires aligned, right? And we want them aligned so that when we drive down the street, we don't feel all these bumps. So you can tell I'm not a real mechanic, but I just know you have to have your car aligned, and it feels better. But the degree to which we are able to bring lots of separate elements together and the degree to which they correspond. So I always say to folks that I'm not as concerned about consistency. I'm concerned about the congruence and the correspondence. So do we have to have exactly the same curriculum? Probably not. But is it helpful if we understand how curricula are aligned across environments? Yes. So that we understand the differences and we can make those connections for kids. So when we talk about alignment, we consistently talk about the alignment with our standards, the alignment with our curriculum, and the alignment with the assessments that we use for kids. And those are the things that then help support the instructional approaches that we use. So this book, this Pellegrino, there is a book out, and you all can actually get this free, download it free as a PDF, and I think it's on your resource list. But this book came out of the National Research Council, and it was really designed to help us think about how we use assessments for teaching and learning. It's not necessarily an early childhood resource, but I think a lot of the information that's in there can be applied to early childhood settings. But let's talk a little bit about early childhood practice in terms of assessment, curriculum, and instruction. And I think the first thing that we have to understand in early childhood is we really have very few curricular materials that have been validated as really promoting good outcomes for kids. So there's a lot of work going on now to look at different curricula and what are the outcomes and to what degree are they effective. We tend to use curriculum-based or criterion-based curricular approaches in early childhood, and you might recognize some assessments like teaching strategies gold assessment, which goes with the creative curriculum. Some states are using the AEPS, some states are using the HELP, some states are using Brigance, some states are using HighScope. There are a number of assessments out there that folks are using. Most of these curricular approaches are criterion-based or curriculum-based, meaning that these assessments are geared towards providing support to teachers in picking up instructional strategies and figuring out where kids are on a regular basis, ongoing assessment process. They typically use authentic approaches, meaning that we observe children over a period of time in a setting, and then we go back and look at the skills and competencies that they can demonstrate based on rubrics within the assessment. The other thing in early childhood that has happened over the last decade is the development of early learning standards or guidelines, which is what children should know and be able to do. States were supposed to do these in areas of literacy and math, but many states developed early learning guidelines across the domains, including physical, including dance and music and the creative, language, science, and these were supposed to be aligned with the K-12 standards or core content. Many of you also know about the Common Core, which has come out, and so states now are working on how does how do the early childhood standards align with the Common Core that many of the states and districts are adopting. So this alignment means that the assessment that we use is directly linked with the curriculum that we use, and that the curriculum provides ongoing feedback on how we change the instruction and support children in continued growth and development. So what are the issues that we have to think about in alignment? First off, in early childhood, there isn't enough of a focus on the alignment of the standards with the curriculum. So I'm going to give you an example in my state, which is the state of Kentucky. We spent a lot of time looking at our early learning standards and literally aligning our standards with these 12 or 13 different assessment tools so that we knew where our standards were covered in the assessment tools, and then with curriculum that go along with those assessment tools. It gets harder when you're trying to align it with the Common Core or the standards that are happening in the early grades, unless states have adopted, as they're starting to do, a Common Core. The other thing is that many of our curriculum-based assessments and tools look at age levels that don't necessarily align with age levels in the standards or age levels in terms of the gap between where the standards stop and then where the K-12 standards start. So we have to understand, for example, with infants and toddlers, we look at domains versus subject areas when we get up to K-12. So how do you take cognitive domain and map that onto science and math and more subject area or subject areas? I'm trying to read some of your parking lot questions, so if I can answer some of these as we're going, I can do that. All right. So if we're going to think about these issues of alignment, continuity, and transition, one of the things that we discovered about a decade ago was we had not done a good job of articulating what a successful transition looked like. So we spent a lot of time talking with folks around the country to figure out when transition works well, and kids, well, let me back up. Kids transition well all the time, because rarely do we have kids who don't make it to another setting. A kid leaves preschool and they actually do get to school for the most part. But getting there doesn't mean it was successful. And so if you get there and you do well and you adjust well, what does that look like? So through a number of focus groups and some research that we did, we proposed these three things in terms of how we might measure whether transition works well for a child. And that is, when a kid gets into a new setting, they are able to engage in both the social and the physical environment. So I am able to make friends. I'm able to access the physical environment, understand how to do that. They are also able to successfully adapt to the structure and the culture of that new environment. So many of you know, if you've been classroom teachers, there are the rules which you articulate, and then there are the unwritten rules. Sometimes our kids have trouble adapting to those unwritten rules or the culture of the classroom. Sometimes kids have trouble adapting to the structure. They might go from a very loosely structured classroom environment and transition into a classroom where the teacher likes a lot of structure. And so if they're successful in that transition process, and we've done a good job of preparing them, they should be able to adapt fairly quickly to the structure and culture of that classroom. And then, obviously, we want kids after transition to continue their growth trajectory. So we want them to be able to engage in those materials, adapt to the structure, and then continue to develop and grow and learn new skills.
Great. So it's been great to hear a little bit about the continuity and alignment and the importance of those elements of transitioning children into a formal schooling experience. What we're interested in finding out now from you as participants is thinking about what does the lack of continuity and alignment do to the early childhood transition. So when those things are not present, what are the effects that you would see? We're going to put up another pod and let you respond to that question. And while you're all typing, I think there are a few things in the parking lot that Beth and I can start to look at and address.
Yeah, so let me start with Drew's. Solid research showing that full-day 3-year-old programs are better than half-day and transition to another. I think that there's a lack of strong evidence about that in terms of research where we could say there is causation or that there are relationships around that. But I do think that we're seeing more research saying that the more discontinuity kids have, the poorer their outcomes. And so if you think about that logically, keeping kids potentially in a setting longer so that they have time to get used to that setting and really engage in that setting should potentially lead to better outcomes for those kids. And I always talk to folks about we tend to think it's really good to, let me take childcare, for example. In childcare, they transition kids out of the infant room into the toddler room and out of the toddler room into the preschool room. Well, if you look at settings outside our country, so settings, let's say the Nidos in Italy, they go with kids so that kids have a primary caregiver that stays with the kid for a long time, for years, 2 or 3 years, so that they're not making those transitions. So I think there's this concept that the more we keep kids in settings for longer periods of time where they have consistency in instruction and consistency in caregivers, the better they do socially and academically. So, Drew, if I didn't answer your question, feel free to throw something back up in the parking lot again. Oh, let me say one more thing about that, though, while you all are writing, because I hear this all the time from folks, too. That only works if it's a good match between the kid and the teacher, right? So putting a kid in an environment that's not good for them and keeping them in there for a long time might not be good either. And so we have to use some, again, common sense in terms of to what degree is there a good match for that child and that adult, and are they able to develop some close relationships. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit in terms of strategies.
And I think just to address Kate and Millicent's conversation regarding providing resources and addressing the needs of the stakeholders, the families that are involved with early childhood, we're going to touch a little bit about resources later on in the webinar, and I think you'll find the access to some of the resources on the Connect website will lead you in a direction that might support some of that. And Beth, you can feel free to add anything else about.
Yeah, I think that especially when we have families who, I always have to think about how I say this. If you as a parent, if you've been a parent and you understand the stress of what it's like every day to get food on the table and get your kids where they need to go, those types of things, and then you add to that other factors like I don't have enough money and I have to make decisions on that. You know, parents who have to move every month because they can't pay their rent and they're going to get evicted anyway. Or families whose language is not English and how they're navigating those systems. Or families who have kids who don't develop typically. And so you're adding to their transitions these real concerns about their child's health and well-being. And I think, yeah, we sometimes need to step back a little bit and think about that and what that does in terms of impacting our ability to both support those families and really understanding where families are coming from so that we can better support them through the transition process. It's really important. So we will talk about some of those things a little bit later on with the Connect module.
And I think turning back to some of the responses to our question, the impact of the lack of continuity and alignment, and folks are sharing some of their own experiences, I think, and what they're seeing if that continuity and alignment is not present.
Yeah, and Wendy, I love your perhaps viewing this question through the eyes of a child. You know, all of us are different, right? And some people really like change, and some people embrace it, and other people don't. And so I joke with friends sometimes about when I get in the car to go home at night, I am not the kind of person who wants to jump out of my car and go do 17 errands. I want to be in my environment. And so that's really troubling to me to have to do that, unless it's a day for errands, and I know that's what I'm going to do. And so, yeah, I think we have to think about what we like as adults, and then do we like it when we're in the middle of a task at work and someone interrupts us and tells us it's time to move on? Probably not. So really good point. You all have these are great examples. I'm very excited. Yeah, so early childhood philosophies, I think, Kate, you're talking about that. Definitely. If a child goes from an environment in the morning where it's a Montessori approach and it's all about the pink tower, right, and I get to choose my activities and you're going to give me a lesson and I get to go, and then I go in the afternoon where someone is saying, you know, I'm sorry you're not finished with your blocks. It's time for you to go from here to here. That poor child, you know, they're kind of flopping between these very different philosophies and approaches, and how difficult must that be for some of our children.
I think along the same lines, Gina made the comment that knowledge of early childhood development is vital, and I think that that's a critical piece here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think knowledge of the supervisors, we did a study a number of years ago about the degree to which principals in schools really understood developmentally appropriate practice. So they're saying to the kindergarten teachers, get these kids in these desks. And the kindergarten teachers are like, that's not what we do. And so not having supervisors or administrators who really understand the way young children learn can be really hard if you're in that environment trying to teach and you're trying to do what's right developmentally and you're being told to do something different. I think that's a really good point.
And I like Joanne's focus on the social and emotional skills. She mentions that this lack of continuity really presents challenges in very differing levels of skill when students come into a classroom. And I think that that's an important point.
Yeah, definitely. So some of the research indicates that the biggest concern that teachers and administrators have around transition is not academic. It is social behavioral. And so the story we like to tell is if I'm a kindergarten teacher, my whole upbringing in terms of being trained as a teacher has been how to teach very distinct skills. Oftentimes, I haven't been taught how to address some of the social and functional skills that kids need. So when I get a kid who can't follow the rules, who can't stand in line, who can't sit on or get into circle time without making a big production, those kids are seen as definitely more problematic. And a lot of times it's like, I got to get this kid out. They get referred to special ed. And it's really around they just aren't sure how to deal with those types of things. So definitely these social skills, social competence, the ability of children to follow simple rules, to have functional skills, makes it much easier for them to adapt to classrooms. On the side of a kindergarten teacher, in preschool we have these small numbers of kids sometimes with these assistants, and then I get into a public school and I don't have the small little toilets and I have to go down the hall to go to the bathroom. Well, you can imagine trying to get 24 children from point A to point B in a timely fashion and keep them all, like little ducks in a row. It's really difficult. So there's a need for more structure when you're in those types of settings, and we need kids to have these skills. Really good points.
Lots of wonderful conversation happening, and we really like this openness. So we're going to continue on with the webinar. There's going to be some more opportunities for you to weigh in and provide your insight. Meanwhile, you can continue to share your insights or questions on the parking lot. I'm going to move right along now.
Great. Yeah, they'll easily get me stuck, so thanks, Elizabeth. I could talk about this stuff forever. So let's get kind of down nitty-gritty and talk about some very specific practices. So what are some of the things that we can do at the classroom level to support kids as they transition in or out of our programs? So what I want to tell you about these strategies as we get ready to talk about them is we've tried to look at the research and then pick strategies that are pretty low cost and or strategies that might fit within some of the activities that folks already do. So it's a sample of activities, and then I'll give you some resources where you can find more activities and more strategies in a little bit. So let's talk first about this concept of school readiness, and I think some of you have already started talking about this in the parking lot, which is just fabulous. So school readiness has actually been around for a very long time. So we started talking about school readiness during the, I think it was Goals 2000 years ago, where we talked about what is it we need for kids to be ready for school. And the concept came out that it's really not just about getting ready kids, but it's about ready schools, it's about ready communities. And so there are things that we can do to support kids in getting ready for school, but we have to also focus on what schools need to do to both understand kids when they come in and be able to address the needs of kids where they are. And then it's around the community. So we've talked a lot about all these different early childhood programs. So the community plays a big role in figuring out how we support kids for school. Very basic things like the library and to what degree are kids exposed to language before they ever get into a formal program. How are they, kids in urban settings getting through the transportation system or doing gardens out in the, courtyard. So there are lots of things that we as communities can do to help our kids get ready for this school experience. So let's talk a little bit then about what's happening now. And so through the Race at the Top and the Early Learning Challenge, we've now got this new focus once again on school readiness. So if you are fairly old like me, I remember 25 years ago when school readiness first came out and we were all talking about school readiness, and everyone decided that we would do these assessments of kids and we would track them as they came into school to figure out if they were ready or not. Well, it completely bombed 25 years ago. People decided, figure out early on that testing kids at one point in time and determining whether they were school ready was kind of silly because they're going to go to school. We don't want to say to folks, you can't come to school. And then we started these different kinds of, well, you're not ready for school, so you go back to preschool or you go to kindergarten. And it really didn't work very well, so we abandoned it. Well, we're back there again, and now if your states and other states have started back in to school readiness assessments, and they're screening kids to look at the degree to which they're ready for school. We might, I would propose, take a lesson from 25 years ago and figure out what we did then that didn't work, and then how do we build on that now. But we're there. States are doing it. Your states may have school readiness assessments or screenings or something. What I'm concerned about is what do we do with these results and how is it actually supporting kids as they transition into school, and what do families think of that when we say we're going to test your kid to see if they're ready for school, especially if kids aren't in formal settings before. If they're coming from home to school, what does that mean in terms of the responsibility of the parent for getting them ready? So that's my little political soapbox, and I'll move on from that. But what we're going to talk about then is if folks are really worried about school readiness and if we know that continuity, alignment, and transition are important, then how do we identify evidence-based practice? So I'm going to differentiate here using some work that came out of the What Works Clearinghouse a long time ago now, around what is the difference between research and evidence-based. So research, when we think of research-based practices, I'm going to talk about this from the degree that we have a moderate or large extent of evidence through experimental, quasi-experimental designs, random assignment designs, or multiple studies that come to the same conclusions that end in very discrete practices that the research shows work specific conditions if implemented with fidelity. When I talk about evidence-based practice, I'm going to talk about those practices where we have some research, but we may not have a larger degree of research, but we're also using our own wisdom and experience, what teachers have said, used for years, and they say this really works, but also what our values are. So with values, I'll give you an example. My background is special needs, and I truly think that all people have the right to be included in community and in school. That's a value. We have some evidence around the positive impacts of inclusion, but I also think it's a value. You either value inclusiveness or you don't. And is that, to what degree does that play into the practices that we use? So using these two definitions, I'm going to talk about transition practices as a very intentional set of activities that we implement that do three things. And I'm going to focus on these three things based on the research. First, how do we promote communication and positive and appropriate and helpful communication between those who are sending kids on and those who are receiving those kids? Second, how is it we really engage families in collaborative planning as part of the transition process? And then third, to what degree are we supporting two very important components of transition, which is preparing kids for a new environment, which is the responsibility of a sending agency, and supporting kids in adjusting to those new environments and the families to adjusting to those new environments, which is the responsibility of the receiving practitioner, teacher, or agency. So one group prepares, one group supports their adjustment. And how do we do those things? So in 2009, we did an analysis of all the research out there that around transition and looked at the research in terms of those definitions of moderate to large extent of evidence that exists for specific transition practices. And before I introduce you to the practices, I tell you that there were very few studies that we could find around transition and very few practices that we could identify that had a strong evidence base. What we did find is that for all kids, regardless of their income, regardless of their background and their ability level, having a good match between the sending classroom and the receiving classroom was very important. So this is the continuity issue. So if I'm going from a Montessori classroom to a very tightly controlled, structured classroom, that match is not very good. And so that children struggled more in those types of transitions than when there was a good match. Second, this concept of helping children learn skills they're going to need in a next setting prior to that transition really supported their adjustment and their continued growth and development. So let me give you an example of this. We would have preschool teachers tell us, yeah, they've got to do some things in kindergarten that I don't agree with. So I really don't think kids should sit in desks. And so I can't really get on board with that, and I can't support putting my kids in desks. And our response would be, you don't have to. Let's look at what the skill set is that children need in kindergarten, and let's look at ways in which they can practice that skill set before they get there. So an example is kids who get into first grade who have to carry trays with their lunch on it and go sit at a table. What are the skills that they need, and how do we practice those skills in the environment? When we have a family kind of approach to lunch, well. There are things that we can do throughout the day to give them the skills of carrying something across the room, or give them skills where they get a certain amount of food versus the family style where they can get seconds. How do we support that skill development in very developmentally appropriate ways? And that tends to result in better adjustment and better outcomes for kids. There were certain things that seemed to work for different populations of kids. And so for typically developing kids, we have some strong evidence that it's this close positive relationship between the teacher and the child that improve their cognitive skills, improve their social relationships, and there are fewer behavior problems. So how do we develop this relationship between the teacher and child quickly and support that relationship before and during the first few days of their entry into a new program? With the children with developmental delays, this also was an important thing. However, it was associated only with improved cognitive skills, not necessarily with social relationships and fewer behavior problems. There are, and I'm going to introduce them to you a little bit later on, we also did quite a bit of work around looking at practices and strategies that were more salient for children with more significant disabilities and for children who were from culturally diverse backgrounds. So when we get to the resources section, I'll point you to a website that we have where you can go online and use a web tool to look at which transition strategies are most effective for very specific populations of kids, culturally diverse, significant disabilities, and kids who have behavior problems. So I'll point you to those a little bit later on. So Elizabeth.
Okay, so now we're interested in finding out about some of the more specific examples you might have of successful transitions you've seen. So we've talked about the advantages, the disadvantages to having continuity and appropriate transitions. Now we're looking for a few examples of what you think has worked well. I think while folks are typing, there's been a few more comments in the parking lot that you might want to glance at, Beth. Gail's question about making that stability or continuity, does that help kids establish social and emotional eating, which then would allow them to adapt to novel setting later? Are we...
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah. So get to think about that in terms of, kids have different temperaments. And so, I think there's not like a yes or a no. I think it's a question back, that if we understand children's temperaments and we understand those kids who need challenges and need change to get excited and to really engage both socially and academically, what are the opportunities we give them? And then for those kids who are more reticent, who don't really adapt well, what are the things that we need to do in terms of getting them engaged and comfortably engaged? So this concept of stability or continuity to me is around the continuity of expectations. So to what degree do children have to deal with different expectations in every environment that they're in? And then how do they ever figure out how to act when the expectations change all the time? So that's an example of where we'd want some continuity that would support them in both socially and emotionally responding well to new environments. So hopefully, Gail, you can let me know if that makes sense or doesn't make sense.
So that's an important point regarding staffing and having continuity of caregivers, teaching staff that are going to be consistent and stable for these kids.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Kate also talks about, looks like in Virginia, doing a readiness pilot with some concerns about measurement around the social-emotional screenings.
Yeah, I think when it comes to this concept of screening, my word of caution to states is if you're going to use some type of a screener, and so let's say you're going to use ages and stages social emotional component, or you're going to use the DECA, or you're going to use the Brigance, anything where you're looking at measurement and you're thinking of it as screeners, that has to result in action. So if a kid screens on, let's say, the ages and stages SE, social emotional component, they show that they are at risk. To me, it's about what you do with that information and how you refer them on to services, and then how you engage the parents in those conversations. So I think this concept of readiness and then measuring certain components of a child's development, when you get that information, it's so important what you do with that information and how that supports the child's instructional approach. So I'd be interested to see how Virginia is going to move forward on that. Yeah, and I think, Gail, awareness of adults and helping kids recognize and prepare for different expectations. So let's layer on top of that what we know about child development and when can kids be expected to effectively deal with lots of different expectations. And so depending on where they are developmentally, can we expect that of a 3-year-old? Probably not. Can we expect it of a 5-year-old? Some. Can we expect it by the time they're 7 or 8? More likely. And so how do we think about that across time in terms of how we're helping kids build their skills around different expectations?
So there's a few examples here of some successful transitions. I see kind of a trend or theme that it revolves around having a shared experiences in some way, having some overlapping experiences so that kids can see these two environments having some similarities.
Great. Yeah, and the concept of these written agreements and common procedures, amen, absolutely. We have to rely on some of our administrators sometimes to make that happen because our teachers have trouble getting it to that level, but definitely continuity around procedures, fabulous. And these transition committees, absolutely, bringing folks together to get to know one another, to understand what different programs look like, where kids are coming from. I used to joke with folks that we would do these cross-agency visits where kindergarten teachers would go into preschool classrooms at the beginning of the year to kind of get familiar with where kids are coming from, and the preschool teachers would go into the kindergarten classrooms at the end of the year to see. And we realized pretty quickly that we really messed that up because kindergarten teachers were seeing very young preschoolers and preschool teachers were seeing very old kindergartners, and they're all like, no way. So thinking about those types of things are important as well in terms of get folks to understand what happens with kids, where they come from and where they're going to. Really helps. Visiting, receiving programs, great. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. Talking with kids about their feelings, absolutely. Open communication and understanding what kids are, what they're experiencing is fabulous. Y'all are doing great.
Yeah, these are wonderful ideas, and some of which you're going to expand on a little bit. We're going to see a video shortly so people can see this in action if they haven't directly participated in some of the visits, the family visits. They'll get the opportunity to see that. So we're going to pull this poll off now, and we'll move right along.
All right. So let's go into these practices and strategies, and let's see what y'all think about them. So we're going to start with kind of this article that came out from Colker that talked about what are these characteristics of really effective early childhood educators. So take a look at these, and if you think about working with 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, these very young children, I always talk with folks about I'm out of my element when kids get above my knee. Do these ring true? Kind of think in the parking lot about patience, willingness to take risks, flexibility, respect, and creativity. So we know all teachers, to be effective, need to have good pedagogy. They need to know how to help transfer knowledge and skill to their population, whomever they're teaching. But with very young children, what are the things that we have to think about in terms of being a really effective teacher? One of the things that we talk about, and if your state is one of the QRS states, where we're looking at quality rating and improvement systems, we're always talking about including curriculum in the quality rating and improvement system. To what degree do teachers use a curriculum? But if we think about very effective educators, whether they're early childhood or whether they're school age, what we know is early, very young in their career teachers need more structure, typically, like a curriculum that is very it's laid out, it's a boxed kind of curriculum so that they know what to do. Whereas our master teachers tend to take different approaches and different tools from different toolkits, and they create their own curriculum based on their experience and their wisdom. So they're very creative in how they approach kids. They take advantage of kind of intentional approach to engage kids, but they also use the environment and what's happening to kind of gauge what they're doing and change up their approach based on kids. That's what we know works with very young kids. So let's talk a little bit about practices and strategies. So when I talk about practices, I define them very differently. And so as we talk about transition, when I talk about a specific practice, there are things that are very broad and global and can be implemented across different settings. So let's talk about things like family engagement. Engaging families in their child's education, to me, is a big practice. It's something we want to think about doing. But the ways in which we engage families might be different based on our program or our classroom. So if I am engaging families in an urban setting, I might use different strategies to engage them than I would in a rural setting where families can't get to the center as easily. So I might engage them through a distance versus working families, giving them opportunities to engage when they're not on site. So hopefully you can begin to see how a practice is really big, and then the ways that we implement that practice the strategies might be very different. So when we talk about transition, I want to talk about 3 big chunks of practices. The first one is encouraging to staff communication. The second is identifying individual needs. And the third is engaging families. And I'm going to give you different strategies for those. So one way to support staff-to-staff communication is the use of a transition profile. We'll talk about that. Identifying needs would be classroom visits, or phase-in days would be strategies we might use for that big practice. And a home visit might be one strategy we use to engage families. So I'm going to give you a little preview. I'm going to use some materials from something called Connect. Connect is a web-based resource that is free and available to anyone who wants to go on the website. In this, on this website, what we have done is we have created modules around very specific topics in early childhood that support the inclusion of all kids into classrooms and programs. We've pulled together all of the research and identified the evidence-based practices within those content areas. We've developed a web-based module that has one that you can go through specifically as an individual and learn about that practice and the ways that which you implement that practice. But we've also developed it so that folks who do professional development or who teach in coursework can go in and pick and pull different resources and assets, videos, handouts, activities, lecture notes, textbook examples, and then plug those into your own professional development or your own courses. We try to use a lot of real-life examples and videos, and you're going to be exposed to a couple of those today, so that you'll see these very short videos that help us show what the practice in action looks like. So again, they're free, and I'll introduce you to more of these things at the end so that you know where to go to get all your free resources. So in staff-to-staff communication, things that we've already talked about is to what degree do staff in sending and receiving agencies get to communicate? So if I've been teaching this child for 2 years, I've learned a lot about this child's getting ready to come to your program, how can I communicate with you about this child so that you can help this child adjust more quickly when they get into the environment? So what we created here was this concept called a transition profile, which is just a worksheet that you can fill out that talks about very specific things like, this is how the child communicates best, or these are the things that really motivate this child, or this is the child's typical schedule, or these are the instructional approaches that I used with this child that seem to work really well. It can be the form on the website can be downloaded, and you can change it up any way you want. You can steal it, you can change it, you can use it, you can abuse it, you can do whatever you want. It's there for you. Another big practice is this concept of how we identify the individual needs of kids in the transition process. So when I think about this, I don't want us to think about individualization only for kids, for example, who have disabilities. Because what we know is there are children who have risk factors or who are disabled who actually can transition really well, and they need very little in terms of individual assistance. And then there are some kids who we wouldn't classify as having any specific issues, but they get really freaked out with change, and they need a lot of support anytime they're going to go into a new setting. So how do we figure out what kids need? And then how do we individualize their transition process or the strategies that we use that really help them? So one idea for some kids might be this concept of phase-in days, where instead of a child coming into a program and starting 5 days a week, 6 days, 6 hours a day, we might allow that child to transition more slowly into the classroom, giving the teacher more time to kind of develop this relationship with the kid, because the kid really needs to trust that adult and doesn't trust easily, but also giving the teacher opportunity to think about what are the very specific ways that I can engage this child with his peers or in the environment to help them with that transition process. So that's a strategy on identifying individual needs. What we've done in the packets on the Connect site that you can also reach is give you just a basic template for how you might structure phase-in days and a plan for phase-in days with the parent, with the teacher, so that the child may come in over, a week. They may come in over 2 weeks. You would structure that whatever meets the need of that child. Excuse me. Sorry about that, folks. In engaging families, an idea of a strategy here is this concept of home visits. So home visits might be something that a preschool or a kindergarten program does anyway, but how do we take a home visit and actually use it as a transition strategy? And so for this, in this situation, the initial home might be focused specifically on before the child comes into the setting, how do I begin to build a relationship with that child so when they get there they've seen my face? How do I help the family understand what the program is going to be like? How do I figure out what they're most concerned about so that I can address that in advance? And then how can I figure out what are the very specific things that we can do in partnership to get your kid ready for that very important first day of school in the new setting? So to help you with this, we have some sample tools like a home visit planning form, and then after the home visit, a way in which you might follow up with that family on what strategies you're going to use and decisions you made about that child's first day of school. So I'm going to show you, well, I'm not going to show you because the REL folks are going to show you because they're really good at this and I'm not, an example home visit. So let me set the context for this. This is a home visit actually of a young child named Tamaya, and Tamaya, or a young, that's not true, a young infant who's getting ready to come into a preschool classroom. And so this child, it's going to be their first experience in a group setting, very young, and so I want you to kind of pay attention to how this young teacher goes in and engages the mom, plays with baby, and kind of lets baby know who she is, shows that she cares about this young child at the very get-go. What questions does she ask, and how are the mother's concerns addressed? How does she treat this mother in her own home? And then how might this visit either prepare or not prepare? Are there some things that some missed opportunities from this teacher to help both the mother and the child get ready for this new setting, this new child care setting that they're going to go into? So with that, I'm going to let someone else make this happen.
Sure thing. The video should be coming up onto the screen in just a moment.
What her current therapy schedule is. Hi, Lakeisha.
Hi.
I'm Diane.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. And this must be Nakaya.
Yes. Say
Hi, Nakaya. Thank you both for welcoming me into your home.
No problem. Come on in.
Coming from one program into ours, do you have any particular concerns about making that change?
My only concerns would be the same as they were when she entered the program that she's in now, and that would be safety and health, environmental and health safety, and then also making sure her needs are met throughout the day, and her schedule is followed as properly as possible.
Right. Well, in the nursery, we pretty much cater the day around the needs of our individual infants.
Huh?
Would it be all right if I held Nakaya?
Sure. Will we take you out? I'm going to go see Miss Diane.
I'm anxious to see you. I see some neat toys over here. Would you like to see them with me? Let me show you some pictures of our program in action.
Okay.
Thank you, Nakaya. It's been great getting to know you a little bit better, Nakaya.
To you too.
As far as next steps as we get closer to the enrollment, I have this sheet to give you.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it has all of our team's contact information on it and a brief biography of our teaching team, which is myself and Melissa. You'll see that this includes our daily schedule.
Okay.
You'll have an opportunity to fill out this side so that we know the specific feeding routine and the sleep routine that Nakaya is on when she arrives. And we do our best to follow everything according to Nakaya's needs. Well, as part of the transition plan, we'll be taking that information, having you fill out in a little bit more detail what her current therapy schedule is, who the therapists are.
Okay. Good. Well, we look forward to transitioning in.
Great.
Huh.
And we can't wait to see you again, Nakaya. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Right. So, hopefully what you all can do from that video is kind of make a leap towards older children, how you might use the same kind of skills or same kind of strategies with kids who might be a little bit older, going into kindergarten or going into preschool. So now that you've seen it, take just a minute, if you don't mind, to think about, was the mother engaged? And then what were the questions that she asked, and how well did that teacher address those questions? And then do you think that visit would have done anything to help specifically the mom in this situation? The child was pretty young, although I'd like you to think about that as well. And then think about how might you use this video as a springboard to think about practices that you could use in addition to a home visit that would do the same kind of thing in terms of supporting the preparation of a child or family for a new setting. And Elizabeth, do we want them just to do some thinking? Oh, there we are. Thought there was a little thing there. Sorry.
Yeah, there it goes. It's coming up there. A nice little conversation in the parking lot going on about the value of the home visits and sharing some ideas there.
Those are great. Yeah, I like this idea of bringing something to help the child, with that adjustment, and hoping that folks are okay with that when they get into the setting. Sometimes people are like, don't bring your little cuddly. I was like, yes, please let them bring their cuddly so that they can really adjust to that setting, give them something to help them feel more secure for those first few days.
And over here in the reactions to the video, I like Kate's assessment of empowerment. That is a great way to characterize how the teacher interacted with the parent.
Yeah, definitely. And does the parent get training? I think that's a really good question. Some folks are really good about providing very specific ideas to families in terms of how they can be engaged, but I think it really varies district to district, community to community.
So just kind of a side question for you, Beth, in regards to this piece on home visits. We're seeing here with this group especially that there's a high value placed on the home visits. I'm not sure how many early childhood educators use this strategy, but what are the reasons that folks don't use it? There's obviously time implications with it. Are there reasons for not doing home visits?
I think what we hear a lot is, depending on the context and the community, safety issues for staff. Obviously, there are financial implications in terms of, do teachers do that during their own time? When do they do it? If there's not much time before school starts, and when do they get these things in? So I think there are some real, potentially some physical and safety concerns with folks. But let's think about, if folks cannot do home visits, what are the other ways in which we can accomplish the same things as that individual home visit? So examples, and we have a video on the Connect site as well about a family member bringing a child into the center for a visit and the introduction that they do. Sometimes we talk about having, depending on the child, having a child and a parent come to the program when no kids are there so the kid's not overwhelmed with all the things that are going on. They take what we call an environmental scan, so looking through the classroom and the family member being able to say, Maria's never, played on this kind of equipment. We don't have slides. I'm really worried about their safety. What are we going to do to make sure she's safe? Or to what degree does the family feel comfortable that the child's going to be able to eat at the table with other people or be happy with the food they serve? So those are other kind of alternative strategies that we present, and then some forms that we give you on how you might plan some of those things.
Wonderful. So to keep in line with this part of the conversation, I think we have another video, a brief one that we'd like to show. Is this a good time for that, Beth?
Sure.
We're going to keep, okay, yeah, the video should be coming on up. This is just going to be another example. I don't know, Beth, if you want to give a lead into this one.
Yeah, I think on this one, the teacher is welcoming a child into their classroom for a brief visit before the little kiddo starts the first day of school. So it's that alternate to doing a home visit. I think I get it.
First, I'd like to show you where his cubbies are outside in the hallway. And then every day, when Mommy comes to get you, she can read about all the wonderful things that we've done for today. And you'll have a folder with any information. Well, we keep all the folders up here, so that you can get that. And inside, he will have an art box. So would you like to see your art box, where you keep all of those lovely drawings? Okay, let's go see your art box. I like it when you hold my hand. You have such soft hands. And I made a book all about you and your new experiences. Would you like to come with me and read it? Yeah, let's come and read it. And that's Miss Letitia standing over there. She's going to be your other teacher.
Hey, Miss Letitia.
So wave to Miss Letitia. Say hi, Miss Letitia. This is Dominique's new classroom. And this is a picture of who? Is that you? Soon, Dominique will have new friends to play with in his classroom. And there's a picture of Kirsten. She's going to be in your classroom next year. And this is I am Emily, and Emily's going to be a new friend for you. And new teachers, too. And that's me. I'm Miss Benici, and that's Miss Letitia. And we're so happy that you're going to be in our room. Yeah. What are those kids doing? Is it story time? Do you like story time? I like story time too. So welcome, Dominic. And that's you playing in the sand. So would you like to take this book home so you can look at it and learn about your new friends? Mommy can read it to you.
What do you say, Nico?
You're welcome, sweetie.
All right. So, Elizabeth, should I move on?
Sure. What we're going to do is skip over that next question because I think we've had a lot of opportunities for folks to share some of the strategies that they've used in their own settings. So we're going to move right on to professional development.
Great. And so I want to answer, Renee, your question around these kids just regular ed or special ed. The Connect materials were developed specifically for children who have potentially have disabilities, but we tried to include strategies that would work for both. We were funded through the Office of Special Education Programs, so we tried to hold true to their mission for most of the work there. So I think, you all can chime in as we have discussion a little bit later. Most of the strategies that we picked really are applicable across different ability types or kids who are more typically developing. What I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk specifically around professional development, and then how is it we can provide high-quality professional development experiences for folks in early childhood education. So I want to start with defining professional development. A group of us through the Connect project spent a bit of time thinking about how we would define high-quality professional development in the field of early childhood. And we proposed this definition, and it was this definition that we used to develop the Connect materials. So basically, the three big pieces of the definition include structured teaching and learning experiences, ensuring that the folks who are the target of the professional development have opportunities to practice and acquire new knowledge, skills, and dispositions, but most importantly, have the opportunity to apply this knowledge in practice in their work settings. So that means it's those three critical features. It's structured, you acquire the knowledge, but you actually apply the knowledge in practice. So what we know about PD is it is around knowledge utilization. So the what for PD is to what degree do we acquire and use knowledge, apply the knowledge in practice. The how is through lots of different support models. So I'll talk you through a little bit the way that we design the Connect modules to really get at support models for how people can apply these practices. And who should provide PD is big. So we have people who provide technical assistance or are providing professional development. We have communities of practice, and for REL, you all will have this opportunity to join these forums afterwards to continue your practice in your community of practice. Looking at practical field experiences and implementing models such as consultation, mentoring, and coaching. So what is the content of PD? And in early childhood, we've called this core content, which is weird because in K-12 we call core content what kids should know and be able to do. But in early childhood, we long ago started talking about core content, which is what professionals should know and be able to do, and we think of those as competency standards and credentials, or defined by those things. Many of you in your states may have early childhood core content, which is typically a rubric that looks at different levels, what are the competency, skills, and knowledge that folks who work with young children should know and be able to do. So you might ask if you don't know if your state has something like that. And then the pedagogy is the same as with our teaching. We have to have pedagogy related to how we provide PD. And we're beginning to understand a lot more that there are evidence-based practices in which we can provide professional development that actually leads to behavior change for the professionals who take the PD. But that is not going to happen in a sit-and-get situation where we just bring people together in a room, talk at them for an hour, and then expect them to change their practice based on that. What we know in early childhood is that oftentimes we can train practitioners on good practice, like home visit, but if those practices aren't supported by the administrators, they actually don't happen in those classrooms. They have to have the right materials, they have to have the right support to transfer that knowledge from the training into their practice. And so that leads us to the who of PD, and what we have also learned through implementation science and the ability to take practice to scale is that it is the characteristics of the PD providers that are as important as the characteristics of the learners. So if we don't have good trainers and we aren't selective in who we pick to do training or do PD, we also are not going to see change in practice by teachers and practitioners. So let me take you to the Connect stuff again and tell you how we try to apply the professional development evidence to the modules that were developed. In the Connect modules, we ended up using what we called a 5-step process for every module. So the first thing was we start each module with a dilemma. and we try to start each module with a real-life dilemma. The dilemmas are presented from the teacher's perspective and from a parent's perspective. So for a transition, it might be the teacher is really concerned that she's going to get this kid in her classroom is not ready to address the kid's needs. The parent's really concerned that the child's not ready to transition. And so we have videos and audio transcripts of the dilemma from both the teacher and the family's perspective. Then what we try to do is to pose a question. And so if this is a dilemma, from a teacher's perspective, what would it mean if we address this dilemma? So what is the question that we're trying to address within the dilemma? So how can I implement a transition practice that will support this child in adjusting to the new environment? Then we spent a lot of time culling through all of the research to come up with a short and sweet description of what the research tells us about the specific topic. And so we have a colleague in Kansas who worked with us, Ann Turnbull, who said it's like for families and for teachers now, we have so many resources available through the interwebs, I'll call them, that it's like trying to take a sip out of a fire hydrant. And so when you go on and start looking at trying to figure out how you're going to address a dilemma in a classroom, you can be bombarded on the internet with lots of different things. How do you pick out the nuggets of gold and what you're going to do? So we try to do that for you, go through the fire hydrant, figure out how to take the sip of water that you needed, and then present that. Then give you opportunities to actually practice those skills through different activities, and then evaluate those to see if they're going to make a difference in terms of the classroom. All the videos are like what you saw. They're very short, to the point, and all of them can be downloaded, taken, and used any way that you want. Sorry, I lost my mouth for a second. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
They're loving the resources. I'm glad you're able to share that wonderful resource for them.
I hope you use it, because and I'll tell you a little bit more about what's available for you. We have modules on what we call or interventions, in terms of interventions within the classroom. We have the module on transition. We have a module on communication between professionals, so building teams. We have a module on building partnerships with families. We have a module on using assistive technology in classrooms. We have a module on dialogic reading, and we have a module on tiered instruction, think RTI, and what that means from the cognitive and social perspective. So the focus of the modules is on learning, implementing, evaluating, and refining your strategies, and we try to tailor it to meet the needs of all kids across a variety of settings, but really paying attention to the family perspective and what families think about in terms of these different dilemmas. So very good. So hopefully you all will get in there and play around with those. So the resources that I want to talk through really quickly, the first one is the transition practices. What you'll see at the top of this slide is the website for our National Early Childhood Transition Center. There are lots of papers, research briefs. There is the transition toolkit that I mentioned to you before, where you can look at specific transition strategies for different populations. And then you can literally put in kind of what you're looking for, and it will spit out a page that you can print. So use that, and I've used that as well, as much as you want. There are specific recommended practices for transition, specifically for children with disabilities, that just came out from the Division for Early Childhood. That's the second bullet there. And then you can go online to get the modules for Connect through the Community FPG site, and then our work through the Kentucky Partnership site. I feel like I'm talking a mile a minute now, so I'll try to slow down a little bit.
The great thing is for folks who may not be able to capture all this, you can download the PowerPoint down in the bottom in the resources pod, but we will also be compiling a list of the frequently asked questions and the list of resources that we'll post on the REL website after the event in about a week or so. So you'll be able to access this information all in one place and share it with your colleagues who may not have been available today. And there will also be an archive of today's webinar. So lots of ways you can continue to look at this information. So let's open up for one of our last questions. We're winding down our 2 hours together. So given all of this discussion about the professional development approach and the different tools, we're wondering about your professional development in your district or state and how that's focusing on the transition needs of young children. So again, you'll see a pop-up box, and we'd like you to share some of the ways professional development is working where you are. I see you're probably seeing also, Beth, in the parking lot, a lot of great ideas continuing to flow about how folks are engaging parents, engaging families in informal and formal ways, and some of the challenges with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the barriers that we put up sometimes unintentionally for families to really be engaged is quite interesting. And so this concept of fingerprinting to volunteer, it's very interesting. I hadn't heard that one before. So what are the ways in which that we develop strategies that really are designed to actually engage families versus things that might serve as barriers are important to think about. Now, I always love the idea of this, the translation, and I think you're right, Joanne, that a lot of times it seems like a really simple strategy, but people don't always think about it, or they're concerned, or sometimes they say that there are reasons why they can't translate things, either financial reasons or worry about mistranslating and what that means in terms of the different dialects and things like that.
Shifting back to the professional development conversation, it looks like the few comments we have already are a little disheartening that professional development is not really occurring for some folks.
What we've heard just anecdotally is that a lot of times, especially in public school settings, the professional development is geared towards the majority, which happen to be the K-12 settings and not always around the pre-K setting that might be part of that district or that school. And so I'd be interested to see if that's really what you all are experiencing as well. And then how do we go about changing that? Maybe at the very least you all have some professional development materials you can use on your own or send people to with the Connect modules if the districts aren't able to provide some specific training.
It's always a nice strategy to, once you find a worthwhile resource, bring together a few teachers and, create your own professional learning community and have the discussions yourself, even if it's not fostered by the school or the district. When you find good resources, making sure you share them and discuss them and try them out.
Yeah, definitely. And that's great in Arlington. Good, Kate. That's good to know. Maybe your PD is open to other people.
People are going to be reaching out to you for ideas.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll give folks just about another 30 seconds or so to type in the responses about the PD, and then we'll move ourselves along. Exactly, Velma. I think that's the kind of sharing I'm talking about, somewhat informal, but getting folks together to share best practices and talk about what's really working.
Great. Oh, and Renee has a really hard issue to address.
All right, so I think at this point we're going to pull that pod down and we're going to let you give some final thoughts, Beth, before we close out for the afternoon.
So this is a little bit of a hard format sometimes when I can't see your faces and all that, but this has been great to read your questions in the parking lot and your comments and your strategies, so I appreciate the opportunity. But what I hope we were able to accomplish a little bit was helping you with some resources and some understanding related to why the early years are so important for success later in life. And we're getting more and more research around the implications of that. So hopefully you've got a couple to look at. There's a new report that just came out, added to the resource list. And off the top of my head, I can't remember what it is, but maybe Lauren, if you remember, you can put the name up on the parking lot. So hopefully there are going to be more studies looking at the early years and what are the implications long term. I would purport that we really do need to understand what those elements of successful transition are so that we can address transition effectively. I think we did a study looking at the strategies that people were using across the country and identified 1,335 different strategies. So there's lots of stuff out there, but we really have to figure out what are those, which of those strategies really are the biggest bang for our buck, and how do we pick those strategies that are going to work the best under our context in our districts and in our areas that we work in. We would say that the evidence is becoming more clear that those practices that are tailored to the individual needs are the practices and strategies that get the most, that have the most impact. That it's very easy sometimes for us to get caught up in those whole group activities where we have an orientation where everyone's coming to one event, and those are great, but sometimes it's the individual. If we don't understand what the individual needs are, then we might be providing a lot of support, but it's not really hitting at the critical issues that families or kids are having, or not able to engage our families in the way that we want. And then finally, hopefully it's understanding that professional development, we're changing the ways in which we think about professional development. So before it was a matter of sit time, seat time, shotgun approach, throwing things out and then hoping that people change their practice. And what we know from the evidence now is that it doesn't happen. That if we provide lectures, people walk away with 10% of the knowledge that we're trying to get across. If we combine the lectures and professional development and the sit time with actual application of new skills in environments, the behaviors, we can actually change behavior 90% of the time to more effective practices within the classroom. So let's think about how we're doing PD. Let's think about how we're supporting change in practice of teachers and using our resources to do that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Beth. I can tell by the engagement in the parking lot that folks have certainly gotten a lot out of today, but we have one last set of questions where we'd like you to share your key takeaways from today's presentation and an action step or one or more that you intend to take. We see a lot of sharing going on, and we know that what you will take away and what you intend to do with that will really give some great ideas to the others on the call today. So you'll see another pop-up box come up. We'd love you to share your ideas there. Wendy's comment about looking at the strengths of staff and those who are supporting early childhood, I think it's really a great point, and something that I've noticed specifically in this webinar is that folks are really coming with such proactive and positive ideas, and it's a really great way for folks to learn and share. Looks like the attention to the transition plans is really key for folks.
That's really good. Oh, good. I'm glad you like the free materials. I've never met a teacher that didn't like free materials.
If only you could find a way to put some food in the website that people can access, because we know teachers love food, candy, and any kind of food. And I hope that some of you on the call today are the ones who can offer PD or can influence some change with how professional development is used in your school or your district, because there's a lot of good ideas, and it looks like that's a focus for many.
Definitely. Yeah, and we definitely encourage you to take any of those materials that are on there's a whole instructors page on the website where you can literally look at all the handouts, PowerPoint, videos. You can download them, you can take them. So do your own training and use all those materials. I love it. And if I can help you, let me know.
We'll just take about another 30 seconds or so for folks to get their final thoughts down there. If you do have any burning questions that you feel have not been answered, please feel free to post those in the parking lot at this time. Try to address those in the last few minutes. Great. Wendy, looks like you have some key folks to impact with this information. Future educators or potentially current educators, and some of the decision makers.
Definitely. And Wendy, there might be some things on the Kentucky Partnership website, that link that we showed you earlier. We've got some training specifically designed for child care providers around a number of topics through our child care resource and referral network. So you might find some additional things there to help you. And you're welcome.
So if you'd like to continue this conversation with the colleagues who are on the phone, we do have a forum. I'm going to pull down the 2 pods that are there right now so that we can make sure to show you the information on the forum. It looks like people are valuing this time to connect. So if you want to continue the conversations, let me get to the slide. Here we have our forum, the REL Mid-Atlantic /forum. Feel free to go there and share ideas and connect, share resources with one another. As Beth mentioned, you can also be in touch with her with any questions or seeking resources. I'm sure she'd be happy to respond. And if you have any general questions about the webinar series or the work that the REL Mid-Atlantic does, I'm happy to answer those questions. So feel free to reach out to either one of us. And we do hope many of you will plan to attend some of our upcoming webinars. We have one in just a few short weeks on effective school leaders. So we learned a little bit today about the importance of leadership and administrators understanding the needs of early childhood. So this might be a good opportunity to hear about it from a different perspective. We will have an Ask an Expert chat on using classroom observations to measure teacher effectiveness in about a month from now. So we do hope you'll have planned to attend one of those or both. We also really value your feedback. We take it into consideration in planning the subsequent webinars in our series, and so we hope you'll take the time to fill that out this afternoon and give us feedback. And at this time, I would love to give a virtual applause to Beth for her time today, sharing her expertise, and for just being a wonderful presenter and engaging with all of you this afternoon. Appreciate all of your time and hope you have a great day.
Thank you all.